I love bourbon, but I'm not ready to restart my career and be a distiller. I have a bachelor's degree, and I want to continue to use those skills in the whiskey industry. So check this out. The University of Louisville now has an online distilled spirits business certificate that focuses on the business side of the spirits industry, like finance, marketing, and operations. This is perfect for anyone looking for more professional development. And if you ever want to get your MBA, the certificate credits transfer into U of L's new online MBA program. Learn more about this online program at business.louisville.edu/online spirits.
So I'm just waiting for the movie where artificial tongues go rogue and like one of them decides it's going to go and replace everybody's whiskey with like rapid age whiskey because it's got the perfect profile and there's just insanity and chaos, you know.
This is episode 217 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny, and as usual, a little bit of news to go through. So Larceny from Heaven Hill has launched a new app. It's an augmented reality app called Unlock the Rickhouse. The app was inspired by the history of John E. Fitzgerald. He was a treasury agent back in the late 1800s and early 1900s and was one of the only people that was legally allowed to carry the keys to the barrel storage rickhouses. With a discerning palate for fine bourbon, John Fitzgerald often used his rickhouse keys to gain access to some of the finest bourbon barrels for himself. And those barrels from which he chose to help himself were often referred to as the Fitzgerald barrels around the distillery. The infamous act of larceny led to the Larceny brand and has now inspired the newest augmented reality app. So once downloaded, you can explore the rickhouses by tapping on each one to search for the prize-winning Fitzgerald barrel. And from September 1st through December 31st, each tap of the rickhouse gains one entry into the grand prize of $10,000. Daily prizes will also be awarded and include everything from a mini barrel shot glass and Larceny magnets, all the way up until a Larceny guitar or an LED sign. So you can get Unlock the Rickhouse available now on the Apple Store and Google Play. On Tuesday this week, I had the pleasure of joining Four Roses Master Distiller Brent Elliott to a special media preview of the 2019 limited edition small batch. We were able to ask him anything and taste through all the individual lots that comprised of this batch. And here's some of the details. The 2019 limited edition small batch will have a breakdown of 4 different bourbon runs. There is an 11-year OESV that accounts for 27% of the blend, a 15-year OESV at 40% of the blend, a 15-year OESK with 25%, and a 21-year OBSV at 8% of the blend. And we got to go through each one of these and kind of rate them all and kind of figure out how they all led into creating their own blend. And the 21-year OBSV had the best nose. It was super oaky, but the finish lacked some depth. And I know there's a lot of OESK lovers out there, but this one had a pretty strong bite to it. It honestly wasn't my favorite. However, the 15-year OESV was the real star of the show. This had depth and complexity and just kept going. It had all the right components into it. But come to find out, this is the same run of OESV that was sold at the gift shop this past year for Father's Day. So there's a few lucky people out there sitting on some really good bourbon right now. And the final proof of this will be 112.6 with around 13,440 bottles to be released in the US and around 3,000 to the rest of the world, with an MSRP of $139.99. During this time with Brent, we also discussed the barrels and if we would ever see a single barrel limited edition ever again. Well, the unfortunate news is that he said it's likely to never happen again. With the explosive growth of bourbon, it's almost impossible to find a run of barrels that were all distilled at one time that would be able to satisfy this type of demand. Instead, these runs will be saved for future small batches for years to come. He said they have plenty of high-aged stock, so this is great to hear for enthusiasts like us. I hope you're out there enjoying these whiskey quickies that we're releasing. As we get into the fall, we're going to be bringing new reviews of all the newest releases, including next week's as we review the new Four Roses Small Batch Limited Edition. All right, now on to the podcast. On this roundtable, we talk about Bourbon Festival season as we just wrapped up one, but we're heading into Bourbon and Beyond right around the corner. And if you haven't yet, go get your tickets. We'd love to see you there, drink some good bourbon, and listen to some good tunes. But after that, we dive into the acquisition business. Was the $233 million deal for Pernod Ricard to acquire Castle Brands, which Jefferson is a part of, was that a good deal? Well, we had a lot of folks that were commenting in our chat section and talking about the EBITDA, or the earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It's a measure of a company's operating performance. One comment we received was from Craig Kessler. He's a chief investment officer as well as an executive bourbon steward. So he talked about Pernod selling Wild Turkey at 12 times its EBITDA, while Brown-Forman was selling at 10x. So Pernod got an above market value during the time of the value of other competitors out there in the market. As for Pernod's re-entry to the market, Castle was trading at a price sales ratio of 1x, and Pernod paid about 2x of the company. So Brown-Forman is currently trading at 8x. So Pernod is paying 75% less than Brown-Forman on a price per sales basis. So from this perspective, it looks like Pernod sold above market for Wild Turkey and bought Castle below. So we'll see about more of that into the podcast. But after that, we also dive into PBR's new whiskey, the artificial tongue, and if EU tariff data that's now been published is still going to continue to wreak havoc on new exports. All right, now let's get on to it. Let's hear a word from Joe over at Barrel Bourbon, and then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Joe Beatrice, founder of Barrel Craft Spirits. I know I talk a lot about blending here, but we also have a national single barrel program. Ask your local retailer or bourbon club about selecting your own private barrel.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. In 2013, I started a series at the Kentucky Derby Museum called the Legend Series. It was a great opportunity for me to sit down with the legends of the industry and ask them questions about their careers and taste their whiskeys. I've talked to great people like Julian Van Winkle, Edwin Foote, Harlan Wheatley, Chris Morris, Bill Samuels, Jimmy Russell, Jimmy Rutledge, and many, many, many more. It's been one of the most important events of my career. And now as I go into building the 8th season of the Legend Series for the Kentucky Derby Museum, I just look back on it in awe. It's also where I made my first connection with the fellas here at Bourbon Pursuit. You may have heard the story where Ryan showed up and forgot to turn on the microphone. We still razz him about that. But it really was a great, great moment, I think, not just for me or the Kentucky Derby Museum, but for all of bourbon. The Legend Series was really one of the first high-level, high-education events that allowed people to get really connected to a master distiller or a CEO and learn about what makes them tick. And I'm very glad to see that today we know everybody's mash bill, we know people's business procedures, and you have companies like Heaven Hill who are creating diagrams for social media about airflow in a warehouse. So much has changed in 8 years. And the people who are most to be credited with this are you. You, the consumer, have more power today than ever before. And let me tell you, the whiskey distillers pay attention a lot more to what you think than they do the USA Today or the New York Times. You are the most powerful person in the equation of American whiskey. They follow what you say on social media. They follow what you listen to, what you read, and they want to know your opinion constantly. So join me in the further pursuit of knowledge, and let's ask people to open up and tell us more about their distilleries. Some people may think it's unfathomable to know what's going behind the scenes when they're making a price increase or what they're thinking when they're changing their barrel entry proof. But 8 years ago, Heaven Hill didn't disclose their mash bills. Now, they freely tell you every single grain that goes into their whiskeys. So things can change. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, make sure you're following me on Twitter and Instagram so you can come to next year's Kentucky Derby Legend Series. You can find me at Fred Minnick. Again, at Fred Minnick. Cheers.
Welcome, everybody. This is the 36th recording of the Bourbon Community Roundtable. This is where we talk about what's happening in bourbon, bourbon culture, bourbon news. We've got a lot of topics to cover, but this is also the beginning and how we're kicking off Bourbon Heritage Month. So everybody, welcome to Bourbon Heritage Month. It's kind of like our Super Bowl, if we will, right? We're finally here doing that. But, not only does Bourbon Heritage Month starting to kick off, but one of the biggest things is this is also turning into festival season. We just wrapped up Bourbon on the Banks. There's one called Kentucky's Edge that'll be coming up in the first week of October. However, Fred's Super Bowl is here in 2 weeks. So, Fred, you getting mighty pumped for Bourbon and Beyond?
Yeah, Bourbon and Beyond is right around the corner. I've got two other festivals right before that one, but Bourbon and Beyond is my baby. I work on it year round. We've been working so hard on it. Obviously, we got the Foo Fighters, ZZ Top, Alison Krauss, Robert Plant, Zach Brown Band. We got all these incredible bands, but we also have, Graham Elliott from Top Chef, and we have a lot of cool panels. Some of you all are on the panels. Nick, Jordan's there on behalf of Breaking Bourbon, but I'm very proud of the curation of the panels this year. And it's just an incredible lineup of education and cocktailing.
Yeah, do you want to kind of give people a little bit of a teaser on what some of these panels are so they can go out and...
Yeah. So, one you're moderating, Kenny, is like, what is a master distiller? And it's something that we in our community, we talk about all the time. Like, what is a master distiller? Right now, technically, Brian, who's just a lawyer, could be a master distiller without even going any kind of training for it. I'm moderating a panel about the history of slavery in American whiskey. This is the very first time that anybody in our industry has approached this. And I want people to realize that, this is something that, we kind of avoided a lot. But you have people like Fawn Weaver, and who's bringing it to the forefront and making sure people want to talk, make sure people talk about it, because it is something important that is a part of the American whiskey heritage. And I don't think we should just gloss over it and so that's a big seminar. We've also got one called Bourbon Disruptors. I'm excited about Brian's panel that he's doing. It's called Whiskey's Dark Past. There's been a lot of murders. There's been a lot of bootlegging. All kinds of shenanigans have been associated with American whiskey, and so we have some deep ones, and then we have some real basic how to make a highball and how to make a Manhattan and an old fashioned. We have a lot of stuff like that as well. So light ones as well as the hardcore ones.
Yeah, and I think at least all of us, we're super excited to actually be there, be a part of it, be on the panels. And, while we're doing that, let's go ahead and introduce all of our guests that are here, our typical roundtable members that are here today. So let's start off with somebody who might not be able to be here for that much longer because he's getting ready to start batting down the hatches as the hurricane starts making his way. So Blake from Florida, checking in. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How are y'all?
We're dry.
I kind of sneak in a little bit. Yeah, it's been quite the week. We, I'm kind of a little bit of a procrastinator on the storm side, but this one looks like we could get a little bit. So no school for the next 2 days at least.
Well, good deal. Well, make sure you stay safe out there. We're all making sure that everything's good for you as well as all the other Floridian bourbon residents that are down there. So hopefully everybody is staying safe and heeding all the warnings of evacuating if you actually need to evacuate.
That is true. Yeah. But the streak continues. I just got to throw that out there. The streak continues. I've got my introduction on the round table.
Absolutely. This qualifies.
It sure does. Yep. Yep. So Blake, if you need to go back, tend to family, please go for it, man. Thanks for chiming in here.
Appreciate it. No, I'm good for a few minutes. Are we into question? Where are we at?
Not yet. We just started going through the table, just going around the horn. So we'll let you take a break. So Brian, you go ahead and take next.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again. This is Brian with Sippin' Corn. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Sippin' Corn, Instagram too, Sippin' Corn, and online at bourbonjustice.com and sippincorn.com. And just to echo Fred's comments, I probably no one is as excited as he is, but I might be second place. Got rained out last year for my bourbon workshop, so I'm really excited about doing it this year. And Fred, thanks for including me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And Nick, let's go ahead. Breaking Bourbon. Let's hear it.
All right. Thanks, Kenny. I'm Nick from Breaking Bourbon, breakingbourbon.com. Check us out on social media at Breaking Bourbon. And unfortunately, I will not be able to make Bourbon and Beyond this year, but Jordan will be there. I will say I am pretty disappointed. It was a pretty fantastic festival last year, even with the rain out the second day. And, I think anybody who's going to be making it out there probably won't be disappointed. So I'm sure, Fred, you're probably going nuts now, still getting ready for this thing. But it's a pretty fantastic bourbon festival. And seems like it's only getting better year after year.
Well, thanks, guys. I got to tell you, it means a lot to me hearing you all say that because, getting rained out, it was like a gut punch. And it was just it was really devastating because we had to cancel the other festival, which is the Hard Rock Festival, Louder Than Life, the next weekend. So all 3 days were canceled. So we're really hoping and praying that we have great weather and we're at a better location that can handle the rain. So like it's at the fairgrounds. It's like right across from the actual Expo Center building. And it's like that flat plain. And it's a much more, it's not as beautiful as Champions Park with all the trees, but it's something that, is if this thing floods, the whole city's underwater.
There's going to be a new meter stick that's going to be on the side of the bridges to show the great flood of 2019, if that's what it is.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, we're not going to have that. It's going to be, remember, the first year it was hotter than hell out. The second year it was just torrential downpour. Third year, it's got to be just clear skies. That's what it has to be.
It's going to be perfect.
Yep. All right, so let's jump into it. So the first topic of conversation is kind of a big one. We've had Trey Zoller on the show before, good friend of the show from Jefferson's, and it was announced last week that Pernod Ricard is going to acquire Castle Brands, which Jefferson's a part of that portfolio, for $223 million. So it's good to see that Pernod is still on the hot streak of buying a lot of stuff. I was just looking at Castle Brands' website. Of course, like Jefferson's is the one that kind of screams out to a lot of us. But they've got an Irish cream and an Irish vodka. They've got Gosling's rum. They've got Aaron whiskey, which I'd never really come around before. But again, it's a bigger portfolio, but it's pretty good to see this sort of thing. We've been not accustomed to seeing a lot of these brands start getting acquired. Now, Pernod is actually kind of on a buying streak, it seems, a lot recently. Do you all kind of see this as a trend that's going to continue to happen? Like, do you think these more smaller brands are going to continue to keep getting swallowed up by a lot of these big ones?
One thing that I noticed about this, and I know what they're paying for them, obviously, $223 million sounds like a lot of money, but for these larger companies, it's really, to me, that's a low amount for a brand like Jefferson's, which really is a workhorse. That's a good selling brand that, that alone could have probably sold, 5 years ago when you had High West sell for $175 million, Jefferson's was 10 times the brand of High West at that point. So I think, and I know what Rabbit Hole sold, but I can't really say. And I felt like that was a low amount as well. And so I feel like they're getting these brands that might be in debt and they may not have as much like, I don't know how Pernod is doing this, but that's not a lot of money for Castle Brands. I just don't think that there was anyone else looking to buy them. And so right now you have the big companies, and I don't know if they're out there looking to buy up, brands, unless it's like White Claw at the moment.
The White Claw is the hot one. And so I guess that, I come from I always say that, well, I come from the tech side. And so seeing things in the, couple $100 million of acquisitions aren't, it doesn't really, I don't really bat an eye at it anymore. So you said that 223 million is just really not a lot. And you think that it also could be, are there really only like just a tiny handful of big players in this game that actually have the capital to acquire? And if they already have something that's in their portfolio, do they need to continue to keep acquiring?
Yeah, let's look at the brands that the big portfolios: Brown-Forman, Pernod Ricard, Diageo. You throw Proximo in there, Beam Suntory, obviously, Kirin, which has Four Roses. You could throw them in there, and there might be a couple others that could really move the needle. But you have to look at like who has what. Sazerac, I forgot. Sazerac's a big player, obviously. And in 2009, Pernod basically got out of the American whiskey game when they spun off, Barton and Wild Turkey, and so you had like this incredible. They got rid of these great brands, and now they're trying to get back into the game after it was too late. And Pernod's got a great Irish whiskey portfolio. So Irish whiskey is the only, whiskey that's really hotter than bourbon. And it makes sense for them to try and get some juggernauts, but they've got Smooth Ambler, Rabbit Hole now, and Jefferson. I think they got Rabbit Hole really because of the facilities. I think Rabbit Hole's facilities have incredible potential for expansion. They fit right into the tourism model. And Jefferson's is a hot brand. Smooth Ambler too has got, they've penetrated a lot of really good markets. So they made some interesting moves, and I think they did them. Whoever negotiated their deals, I think probably did a very good job for them.
Yeah, Nick or Brian, do you kind of see this as Fred said it? Is this Pernod kind of like crawling back into the market a little bit? If you got rid of Wild Turkey at the wrong time because you thought it was basically a bad stock, and you sold it when it was low, and you bought it when it's high, like they trying to like flip the script for themselves here?
Well, I think they definitely trying to do that, but they're filling their roster with D-League players instead of what they lost. And I think their problem is going to be capacity. I mean, how can they increase production of any of those without huge distilleries to be able to churn this out? I see that as their issue. I mean, they can get some from Rabbit Hole and they can get some from Smooth Ambler, but that's a ways off. Jefferson's is still just bottling in Crestwood, right? I mean, they don't have a whole lot of capacity of their own. They're still sourcing. So where's it going to come from? So I see it as problematic. They're buying D-League players, and they're not going to be able to increase production.
I think that to kind of piggyback on the sourcing, and that's, probably the comments that were, at least that I saw, here and there, with, of course, the focus on Jefferson's in the bourbon world, with respect to this acquisition. That's the question. You think about High West, Smooth Ambler, they've got distilleries, they've got that kind of capability. With Jefferson's, for example, it really is the brand that's bought, the distribution, the labels, that kind of thing. So kind of to Brian's point, it's that want to get back in the game, want to get in the game. I think there's still a lot of growth potential in general, but it's what is that, what are you going to do with that? So now they've got the brands, now they've got to pull out from behind that and probably invest quite a bit more.
Jefferson's too, like they go from a company that didn't necessarily have the ability to walk into a company like Brown-Forman and strike a deal for 5,000 barrels of stock. I'm not saying that's going to happen now with Pernod Ricard, but now with Pernod Ricard, I mean, Trey Zoeller's got muscle. Like Castle brand is like, that was like, a AAA baseball team, in comparison to Pernod Ricard, who would be the Boston Red Sox or the Yankees, so the buying power that they have to be, on the source market, I mean, it just went up because they can strike deals that he could never dream of before.
When they start sourcing from Wild Turkey.
Yeah, or MGP, which, they own the facilities after Seagram's had to shutter all their stuff. They got the facility in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and Diageo got, Crown Royal, and they're like, who got the better end of the deal on that, because Pernod Ricard could never make that Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery work. And they sold it to LDI, and that became kind of like the source capital. But so that would be ironic if they end up sourcing from Wild Turkey and MGP.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another question to kind of throw at you all about this is, do we see this is going to be a lot tougher game going into this? We had Trey on the podcast before, like last year, and we talked to him. We said, like, is it getting harder now with sourcing? Like, are people kind of treading into your territory, or you had all these relationships before, and now you've got people that are on your turf, barrel prices are going up. How can you maintain, with not actually having a distillery that can pump significant volume? Was this a good buy for Pernod? Like, that's a tough question. And I think Brian kind of alluded to that. Now, I wouldn't say that they're a D player or anything like that. I'm a fan of Jefferson's. I still like the whiskey they put out. However, in regards of an operation, it might have been a kind of a weird acquisition, in my opinion. Anybody have any thoughts of, like, is because they don't actually do a lot of distilling or heavy distilling? Like, was it a good acquisition, or is it just something that, as Nick said too, it's just maybe a brand recognition thing?
Yeah, you have to understand, like, this business is driven by brands. Like, we look at things from where the liquid comes from, but this business is really driven by, like, a name, and they're, like it or not, whether you if you follow it or not, the Jefferson's Ocean is one of the best, like, marketing ploys of the last 10, 15 years in American whiskey. Now, I remember asking Trey to seeing a manifest of his barrels. I thought he was going to punch me, but you have some people who disbelieve in that it's the ocean barrel concept. But he does put them out there, and it's been one of the best, like, marketing, conversations or marketing ploys that have turned into conversations. At least in my world, everyone's like, "Is it real? Is it real?" You tasted it, So
Absolutely.
It's one of those things that it's probably just on that alone, and the fact that Jefferson's is everywhere. I think it was a great acquisition for Pernod.
So there's another comment here from Dan Walski. He sees Jefferson's brand is probably worth the investment. However, he wouldn't be surprised to see it now eventually start getting separated from Kentucky Artisan and then becoming like a visitor destination of its own now. It's a pretty good theory, I think, for what this could potentially be and where it could go.
Think about the Kentucky Owl situation, for example. Immediately it's the plans for a gigantic park and distillery. So are we going to see something like that? Is that going to be the growth plan for Pernod in this case, or are they just going to keep continuing with the brand as it is and sourcing and kind of doing business as usual? Be curious to see how that changes over time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think there's also something that kind of it kind of jogs my memory when I think about this. When we look at, we had Corky, was last week's podcast. We've had Cave from Rabbit Hole on, and there's always like a lot of these CEOs, they say a lot of the same things of like, we're never going to sell. This is going to remain in the family forever. And then it's like, is it though? Like, is it like, if somebody puts a fat check in front of your face, like, it's got to be pretty hard to turn down.
There's always a number.
I agree.
Well, I think you have to look at, let's take a look at those two particular brands. Cave had a lot of investors, and Corky did all this with his own money, and he's got trusts lined up and everything. It always comes down to the money. And look, man, I'm in business. I don't come for money. I've had to work for everything I've gotten. And when you sit down in a room with money people, they always want something. So, you give up something you give up shares of your company or something to get what you want out of them. But this, there comes a point where they're like, okay, we've had a good time on this ride. Where's our payout? We want out now. We want to cash out. And so everything depends upon how your business structure is. And when you have these small distillers, one of their in games is selling. Just is.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think for anybody that is ever getting into business, like you always want to think like, yes, I do it for the passion. I do it for the joy of what it is. But at the end of the day, if somebody puts a big fat check in front of your face, it's part of the American dream too. So you can't discount that. So, as we'll kind of switch gears a little bit. And this is one that I actually kind of like this one because Fred sent this a little bit before we started here. And this was the fact that PBR is getting ready to start making their very own whiskey. So I will drop the link here into the chat. I'm also going to drop it into the YouTube chat as well, so you can kind of see it. But really what it is PBR is now making a whiskey that's been aged for a complete total of 5 seconds. So that should probably already kind of get your blood flowing a little bit. So they have recently talked about they have a new hard seltzer that's coming out with 8%, but now they're actually going to be doing a 40% whiskey, 40% ABV that has been aged for 5 seconds. So Fred kind of talked about this one. Fred, does this make your blood boil a little bit?
Yeah, I have 2 words for PBR. Fuck you. I think it's PBR is trying to be trendy and they got some headlines with this, but given that we have a brand that's basically repackaged Zima taking over the space of millennial consumption, and actually really White Claw penetrates the entire world right now. Anything is possible with what will be the next big thing. And PBR's got a big brand behind it. And I just wish they would, this is a mockery of whiskey. So I hate everything about
it. Brian or Nick, do you share any of the same feelings?
I kind of always look, I do think it's interesting. It really created a buzz. I think people who may not normally think about whiskey or bourbon or what they really are, I think that just that buzz about that it's going to go into an oak container, it's going to be aged for 5 seconds or, whatever they end up doing with it. If anything, that's an awareness, piece of, well, number one, how good is it going to be? So for somebody that is just doing shots at a bar, they never think about anything, as far as, whether they like things that are, higher quality, longer aged, et cetera. What am I really drinking? Where does it get its color from? Things of that nature. It may cause some people to kind of get curious about what's really there. And I think once people start getting educated, reach the point of, anybody who's listening to this or watching this right now, you're obviously, this is much farther behind, where your journey started, or, much farther behind where you are now, where your journey started. But I think that's the interesting part about it, is kind of just that awareness in what's probably a younger crowd that's going to be more, in tune with this or tasting this or whatever the case might be, where it might make some people curious about exploring a little further and eventually getting to the point where they respect what's going on with the actual, creation and aging and things of that nature. So I think it's interesting. I don't hate it in the same way that I guess that Fred does. Will it succeed? I don't know. It's different than the beer in that sense of, the beer. I see the market for this. I'm not so sure. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think you look at it like everybody wants to try to create something. And, what's PBR? PBR is not supposed to be some glorious luxury brand, right? Like this is supposed to be like bottom shelf, like how fast can we get this out the door and, really just churn product. And this might be following that same exact suit. I'm not too sure if this is supposed to be a premium product by any means.
Yeah, they're not trying to be premium. And I guess from my standpoint, PBR 5 second whiskey has no impact on me whatsoever. And I don't care about it. But I see where it's going. Like Nick said, it's going to be at the bar for a shot. And hopefully it overtakes, some of these other flavored whiskeys, which I don't care about either, as the new hot shot for college age through mid-20s. And then there's going to be a market for that, and there always will be. In my day, it was Jägermeister, and that's awful. And there'll always be something. So, knock your socks off. Go ahead, do a 5-second whiskey. Try to sell it by the shot to 24-year-olds, and I'll keep drinking what I've been drinking.
So, you talk about flavored whiskey there. Have you all seen the new phenomenon of Screwball, the peanut butter flavored whiskey?
Oh yeah, I think I had it first at your house, to tell you the truth.
But it's starting to catch on now. Like
it's out here now. I see it here.
It's in all the forums. People are talking about it. It's like the White Claw of whiskey right now.
That was the first time I had it. Was Bourbon and Beyond last year.
Yep.
So I don't want to call myself a trendsetter, but we did have.
Well, you might be.
So shout out to Tony from Keg and Bottle, who actually gave me that probably about a year and a half ago, and he said, "Kenny, I kid you not, this is going to be the next Fireball." And so, like I said, a year and a half ago, he gave it to me, and now all of a sudden, like, people are buying it. It's taken off a little bit, but you got to like peanut butter, that's for sure, because it definitely has that flavor to it.
Okay, then.
Like it or hate it.
All right.
Fred's position.
Yeah. So back to whiskey. There was something else that came out a few weeks ago on geek.com talking about the artificial tongue. Do you all remember this? So I'll talk about it. So the artificial tongue can taste the subtle differences.
Okay, wait, hold on.
Oh, okay.
I got it. I wonder what the artificial tongue thinks about the 5-second whiskey.
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if that's what it's really made for, though. Who knows, right? I guess we'll find out one of these days. But this was built by Scottish engineers, and it's ultimately made to sit there and try to find counterfeit frauds or anything like that that's on the open market. And of course, we talk about it with bourbon, having counterfeit pappy all the time and stuff like that. However, you're going to see this even larger scale in the Scotch world as well. So Fred, what are your kind of thoughts on this artificial tongue?
Well, I've actually talked to quite a few people about this who are like in a taster's role. And I think most everyone knows I do a lot of tasting, and I think it's I think it's great if it's not like, stealing. I'm curious to see like the data that like goes into it, like how they create it, because I know of one algorithm that's out there that's been taking people's tasting notes and applying them to basically putting a collective algorithm together of like what to say from people, various, like if you're writing tasting notes on Reddit, or if you have tasting notes on a blog or anything that's scannable, there's now there's some spiders out there taking them and they're applying them elsewhere. So robot tasting. So if it's something like that, I'm not a fan of it. But if it's something that really actually adds to the our world, I'm all for it. But the thing is like, right now they're marketing as like spotting fakes, and that's great. But I wonder what their next iteration will be, because eventually it's going to be about like, this is how you taste, so this is what you're going to like, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think this could definitely lead to a lot of different things. I think finding the counterfeits is it's kind of like it's like a gateway. Like I don't think it's going to have a large purpose at first. Like I think you need to cover a little bit more blanket area here when you're trying to figure out exactly what can you do with this technology. It's got to be a little bit more uniform, a little bit more universal of actually how does this catch on, and to the point where Fred, you taste a lot. However, like, is this something where it's like, okay, we've got 6 panelists that are humans, and then our 7th is this AI machine, right? To make sure like everything works, like with this distillery, like, we've been going for utilizing people for the longest time to, nose and taste and actually understand what this is supposed to taste like and which typical batch it goes in. But we're human. Like, what is human? It's you have error. Error is built in versus a computer. Whereas if you're feeding it data, like it's just computations. So, Nick or Brian, like, do you kind of see this like much more spreading its way out into maybe distilleries should start looking into this kind of technology as well?
So I'm just waiting for the movie where artificial tongues go rogue and like one of them decides it's going to go and replace everybody's whiskey with like rapid age whiskey because it's got the perfect profile, and there's just insanity and chaos, you know. No, I mean,
I'm visually just looking as like little tongues across the street, like just like running around, like overtaking a
rogue tongues.
Yeah,
rogue tongues.
Yeah,
I think there could be great applications for it. You know, I guess the question is it going to replace not necessarily master distillers, but, you know, people that, you know, blend and, you know, testing that takes place, you know, within distilleries and that producers. You think about kind of the non-scientific nature of so much of this, and even just tasting notes like you're talking about. I mean, it's a very non-scientific process in the sense, and that's one of the kind of magical things about whiskey. You know, would we, you know, if there was inside each label or on each bottle kind of like a very specific profile of a particular whiskey, or almost a map that was scientifically put together, you know, would that be something that, you know, would enhance the experience? Do people want that? You know, is that the end result of what we're even, you know, kind of dealing with here? I think it's interesting from that aspect. At the same time, I do think one of the great things about whiskey is kind of the human and the art of whiskey. So it's almost a kind of a weird dichotomy of technology and kind of that, you know, artful human interaction that, you know, you don't want to see that necessarily overtaken, but you do want to, you know, you do want to add value when you can. And, you know, there's so many whiskeys, they're so expensive that I could definitely see a, you know, a value proposition for somebody to say, hey, is this something I might like, you know, for example, or how do we design a better, you know, a better whiskey?
I'm really excited that there's been tech applied in a valuable way. Usually tech people apply it in the most into rapid aging or something. Everyone's trying to fix that when there's really not a problem other than waiting. But I'm just glad that somebody in the tech world is applying their know-how and skills to a very particular area that we do probably could use some consistency.
Yeah, I agree with Nick. I'll take it a step further, though. I mean, I think while it's beneficial in some respects to have this AI tasting, because the AI is not going to be thrown off with what you had for lunch or what you had for dinner. It's on the other hand, it's going to be much more sterile of an experience, of a description of what you're supposed to be tasting. And so much, as Nick said, is so much of drinking whiskey is the experience. And it can change if you've got a steak versus something else. And it can change in the mood. And I've been to a presentation Fred did. Music can affect what you're experiencing. And AI is never going to get to, well, famous last words, AI is never going to get to that level of the experience that you can have with whiskey. And if I've got a piece of Gouda that I'm eating with it, AI is not going to be able to tell me, again, famous last words, how that's going to affect what I'm experiencing at that moment. So it's nice, but to me, it's sort of like a party trick.
And we all know that Jim Beam or somebody would hack it to give like something like Allegiant, like a 95.
Right. So now, Brian, I'm picturing like VR goggles, some scent thing going on here. Headphones with your favorite music. You know, you That's feel right. like you're right there.
Exactly.
All the tastes and smells right at your disposal.
Yep.
You'll see that in a few years.
Metallica does that. They have one of their tasters play various, have everybody put on, special headphones, and they have to taste like 5 different whiskeys. It's all their whiskey, but the people say like the whiskeys taste different based on the music they're listening to. And there's new evidence that suggests that what you listen to has a much deeper effect on how you taste. So I am definitely on board with what Brian just said there, that the AI will never be able to pick up more of the human element, at least probably in our lifetime, I think. I mean, I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I don't think it's going to have that human element to it. However, I think there's a lot of potential of what this could do in regards of thinking that you want to create more say a brand that has a very, very specific kind of character. And so you take 1 ounce out of a particular barrel, then you get a chemical breakdown of like the 30 different things that are in it. And it's like, X percentage of something versus Y percentage of another. And then you kind of figure out exactly, okay, I need this kind of percentages, and they all start equaling out. All right, dump these barrels together. And now we kind of see this sort of specific profile that could be coming. So could be completely different in a way of building new brands versus just sitting there and saying like, oh, okay, we'll just go and make sure this is not Pappy. This is just regular W.O. Weller.
And the thing about checking if something's fake or not, most of the time when that matters, it's sealed and you want to keep it that way. So that application is a bit of a struggle, because you're probably rarely going to find a purchase contingent on, opening, pouring, tasting, or testing, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, how would you like to be the guy who just dropped $1.5 million on a bottle of McKenna, gets it tested, like, oh, yeah, no, this is actually Glenfiddich 12-year-old.
You almost don't want to know.
Yeah.
You almost at that point, you're like, no, just keep those things away.
Yeah, there's definitely a bad side to that too. And as we start going down this path, there's was something news that happened last week. There has been a tear on the secondary market lately. Like there's just groups are disappearing left and right. The 2019 Kentucky's Edge Bourbon Conference and Festival pairs all things Kentucky with bourbon. It takes place October 4th and 5th at venues throughout Covington and Newport, Kentucky. Kentucky's Edge features a bourbon conference, music, tastings, pairings, tours, and an artisan market. Kentucky's Edge 2019 is where bourbon begins. Tickets and information can be found online at kentuckysedge.com. If you're making plans to visit the Bourbon Trail, the one thing you're thinking about is, how do I get around to all these distilleries? We recently used Central Kentucky Tours for a barrel pick, and the hospitality and information was top-notch. Heck, even Ryan learned a few new things about Bardstown. Central Kentucky Tours offers public and private tours for groups from 2 to 55, with pickups in Harrodsburg, Lexington, Louisville, and everywhere in between. So book your time with them today at centralkentuckytours.com. You've probably heard of finishing beer using whiskey barrels, but a Michigan distillery is doing the opposite. They're using beer barrels to finish their whiskey. New Holland Spirits claims to be the first distillery to stout a whiskey. The folks at Rack House Whiskey Club heard that claim and had to visit the banks of Lake Michigan to check it out. It all began when New Holland Brewing launched in '97. Their Dragon's Milk beer is America's #1 selling bourbon barrel-aged stout. In 2005, they applied their expertise from brewing and began distilling. A beer barrel finished whiskey began production in 2012, and Rack House Whiskey Club is featuring it in their next box. The barrels come from Tennessee, get filled with Dragon's Milk a year twice, the mature bourbon is finished in those very same barrels. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories from craft distillers across the U.S. Along with 2 bottles of hard-to-find whiskey, Rack House's boxes are full of cool merchandise that they ship out every 2 months to members in over 40 states. Go to rackhousewhiskeyclub.com to check it out and try a bottle of Beer Barrel Bourbon and Beer Barrel Rye. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. There has been a tear on the secondary market lately. Like there's just groups are disappearing left and right. And even the secondary backup BSM group that was over on MeWe, Mayway, whatever it is that's now gone as well. So it's not like it's just Facebook. It looks like this is like a virus that's continually trying to spread, and it's just getting knocked out sort of wherever it goes. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still a few groups that are remaining. They're probably around like the 2,000 to 3,000 member mark, but there's nowhere near, even on the BSM on MeWe was like almost 10,000 or above. So it seems that where everybody flocks to, these are just getting canned left and right. Now I've tried to reach out, haven't really heard anything in regards of why it happened or anything like that. However, it just seems there's no safe haven right now. Do you all kind of see this as, is this going to be the new norm, or is it just like, it's just hot for the moment, we'll have to ride this wave, and then maybe here in another 3 months, we'll be back up to where it was?
It's going to happen. It's just a matter of what and when, and that might change over time. As we're seeing right now, it's certainly changing how the communication is done. Probably the bigger question is if we have these, call it a period of a drought, for example, which is interesting because this is happening, before we start seeing some of the big fall releases and things of that nature. You've got to ask yourself, is that going to change the primary market? Because how much of the primary market is driven by what ends up happening on the secondary market? So a lot of people buying, based on the idea that they're going to be able to turn around and sell for a profit. If that is no longer in place, or that, you knock out 50% or some reasonable percentage of people that are able to do that or see their ability to do that, does that start driving prices down on the primary? I think it'll be interesting to see how that, kind of goes over the upcoming months here.
Yeah, I think we're going to see this. And not only that is, I think Brett Atlas had a post that was on Blake's group this past week of, the new E.H. Taylor Amaranth has now been released. However, nobody can figure out what a price should be on it because there's no place to auction off and figure out what's going to be. Even today, there were, I think, like 72 birthday bourbons that were sold at Old Forester Distillery downtown to kind of commemorate the Old Forester birthday bourbon and George Garvin Brown's birthday. However, I haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of them show up on anywhere. So, this could be a sign of the times that, hopefully you're buying it to hold on to it, because finding the outlets to sell it is getting a lot harder now.
It's definitely interesting. I'm beta testing an app right now, and I've been asked if people can do that. And I'm like, well, I have to seriously look at that now. And I'm thinking of the potential liability associated with it. I'm like, maybe you don't, maybe in your own little private chat group, which I can't see, but it's fascinating to me how this domino effect. And I would love to sit down with Mark Zuckerberg. An interview request I've put out many times, by the way, never going to happen probably. But I would love to find out if he's had a hand in it, or someone at Facebook had it. I would love to hear the rationale behind it. But I know they've said some things, but there's more to it. There's got to be more to it, and it just doesn't make sense to me, especially with this new social media site dumping it so quickly. It's odd.
I agree. It's got to be coming down from somewhere else. I mean, Facebook,
it makes you wonder if brands are involved. Sorry, Brian.
Who is?
Brands. If we've got brands or somebody specific, with intent, and is watching this more closely and specifically.
I think that's a great question, and they have been watching these markets for some time, because they would even price their whiskey to combat it. But I would argue that it may not be a brand behind it, but a very powerful retailer, who wants that money, and knows that money's out there. They want your dollar. They don't want you to buy it at SRP and then flip it. I mean, there's any number of areas this could go. There's any number of people who would like to see it stop. But I do know this. I know that most of the state authorities don't really care. I mean, I've talked to them. They don't really care. But Texas does. Texas cares. Pennsylvania, all the control states actually. But this doesn't seem to be any kind of state leading it. I mean, I don't know.
The control states, they don't want competition. Pennsylvania doesn't want any competition there.
No. What cracks me up about Pennsylvania is every year they send out a press release and, we lost 3 or 4 of them this year, or one was broken in transport. And I'm like, wow, I bet it suddenly got lost on the state majority leader's front step, or the bottle accidentally broke after it was consumed by the director's house, or at the director's house. I mean, it's all kinds of silly with Pennsylvania.
Well, it's control states in general, but I think when we look at just the secondary market, we've talked about it in regards of how this built a culture. This is probably how bourbon has amassed to how big it is, because most people wouldn't even know about a lot of brands if they didn't see them on the secondary markets to begin with. I mean, we all have our stories. So I think it'd be interesting to kind of see where this is going to go. Me, when I look at it, I think this is a critical and crucial part of really what made bourbon what it is today. And, there's going to have to be somewhere where people can basically value this as sort of currency. Maybe it's trading. I don't like to sit there and say like, yeah, go get a birthday bourbon for $150 and go try to sell it for $300. Like I'm not all about that. However, it's like if you can get a birthday bourbon for $150, yet you can't get a George T. Stagg this year, and that's just part of the trade, then that's great, right? That's something that you're able to get your hands on. You can kind of trade your way there, and you start with a paper clip and you end up with a plain. But that's essentially like where I like to be able to see this, because it's all about getting the bourbon that you want in your hands and kind of however to get it. But
yeah, I mean, I think you're right. But to the point of like this helped kind of like spread the enthusiasm. I know like the people in the groups, if you put it on scale, you're looking at maybe at most like 2 million or something, at least the various groups that I knew of. And that's not a lot in the grand scheme of things. But those people were like everybody's influencer in their families, in their workplace, and they would be the people out there talking about bourbon. So, and it would these groups kind of became communities, and I was, I loved them. I loved them because, or actually, I loved them 5 years ago. They changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, but they were very, very engaging. You could talk history. You could talk about who distilled what. Like, I mean, I remember having a conversation with someone, educating him about Woodrow Wilson, which, if you don't know, he was a master distiller at Stitzel-Weller for a very short period, but he made some good whiskey.
And so I guess as we start thinking of other ways of how is the bourbon market being hindered, there's been finally some data that's now coming out about the U.S. whiskey exports and the tariffs that are now happening over in the EU. So when we start looking at this, I look at some of the data here, and I'll drop the link in the chat for folks that want to be able to see this. You can see all these links in our show notes as well. But the Distilled Spirits Council came and said that there was a 21% decrease from June 2018 to June 2019. That was all lost sales after shipments to Europe plummeted. So we got the data coming in. I know, Fred, you're kind of close to this. Is there a way that things could eventually bounce back to help bourbon brands grow? And I will always say it again, that if somebody says, oh yeah, this is great because it means more bourbon on the shelves for me, you're in the wrong here. Okay. Think bigger.
Well, there have been some really nice trade related things that have happened. Like in a couple weeks, I was invited to meet the European Union ambassador to the United States. And they're celebrating Scotch, Irish, and bourbon whiskey, the unique designations of them. And like all the countries are kind of coming together in Washington, D.C. to celebrate this. And so from an industry perspective, they have the ears of their legislators, their ambassadors, their parliament or whatever. Brexit also, threw a wrinkle into it. So in an odd way, Brexit could be, it could be good for the tariffs, for that particular portion. But so those are a couple of the good things. But in all seriousness, they're not letting up. Europe is still very hell bent on applying pressure, and there's been reports that they want to apply more pressure. In Mitch McConnell areas. So yeah, I just don't see this, being good. And it's shut out small brands like Catoctin Creek completely. And Kenny, I know you're a brand owner, and you want to, let's say you want to open you have a small shop in Poland who absolutely loves the show, loves you, wants to make you his number one whiskey in his store. You won't find a distributor in that entire country that'll take your call. It's just because of the tariffs. They don't want to pass that on. They're just not taking calls from small American whiskey companies. So it's tough.
And I think this is as I'd mentioned before, I mean, this is so much bigger than just what you can get here on the shelves. Like this is trying to grow the category as a whole to start taking on Scotch as the whiskey in the market. And we can't get to that level of Scotch unless you have a fair playing field, across the board to be able to say like, okay, like let's get this in the hands of people in Australia and Zimbabwe and China and in the EU as well. Like, how can we grow this as a whole? And this is really where the tariffs are going to start really being that first sort of hand slap, I guess you could say, is if you're trying to reach a new market, all of a sudden, if you've got a $30 or $40 bottle here in the States, I mean, you're looking at doubling that, if not coming close to triple, as you start getting, already just distribution overseas. But now the tariffs are adding a lot more to it. And if you can't compete with a $50, $60 bottle of Scotch, then you're already setting yourself up for failure. And so, as we start kind of rounding this out, Nick and Brian, I kind of want to get your sort of thoughts on this. If you have any sort of inkling of what do you kind of see next? Maybe if it's an election year, is there anything that could change, after that as well?
Nick, you go ahead and go first.
Yeah. I was gonna say the same. I think it's tough to say what's going to happen going forward. I'd be really curious to see, what small brands are seeing the impact of this right now, immediately. Like anything, I think there's the initial shock of it, but then, demand is demand. So if that means a 20% increase in price or whatever the case might be, if the demand is there, over time might cause that to become a non-issue. But it's a barrier, of entry as a starting point. So when you think about bourbon growing on a global scale and the potential it has on a global scale, certainly that's a pretty immediate, block of taking that first step for a lot of these brands on that larger scale. What if you see this go on for a period of time, then suddenly it goes away? Do you have the opposite impact? Do you have suddenly a flood of opportunity, a flood of brands that are saying, okay, now this opportunity just opened up, we're going to put pressure on actually doing this? Because if you think about all the brands that are out there, especially the small ones, how many of them are actually taking those steps right now to get overseas? I'd be curious, out of the, say, 1,000 or 1,200 distilleries, in the US, for example, how many are saying, let's get on the shelves in Europe, or let's get on the shelves in Australia or Japan, or whatever the case might be. China, what's the market like over there? So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. Like anything, it's a global economy. We're going to see the push and pull. And I think ultimately the long-term play for bourbon, for US whiskey, is to be probably bigger than Scotch, quite frankly. I personally think is better. So there's no reason why it can't be bigger, or at least just as big. It's just a matter of time and what, things are going to have to move and shift around, and what dominoes are going to have to fall and when, that's going to allow that to, to really gain some momentum and happen.
Bourbon's got a long way before it catches Scotch. And I'll tell you, like, this is why the tariffs are so frustrating to me, is that bourbon became a unique product to the United States, largely in part because they were trying to get special designations so they would not get tariffed. After World War II, the rest of the world basically tariffed bourbon and opened the markets for Scotch to help the United Kingdom recover from World War II, because they were bombed and everything. They took a much greater hit on the physical real estate of their country. And so they were, places like Argentina, was tariffing us like 200%. United Kingdom actually had like limits of bourbon that they would allow in the country for a given year. And when the bourbon distillers would push to have exports, the French basically came back and said, hey, why would we give you anything tariff free when bourbon doesn't mean anything to us? Like, you have no special designation. Of course, the French, being the home of cognac and champagne, have a very unique understanding of like designation for alcohol. And so in 1958, the bourbon industry started banding together and working to make bourbon a unique product in the United States. And after that, in 1964, they then had the ability to negotiate in free trade agreements to peel away tariffs. And they have been doing that since the 1960s, and they've only just now gotten to the point where their exports are over $1 billion. So that's why this is like so painful for the industry. It's like the bourbon has never been in these countries. I mean, you go to places like Portugal and Spain, you see 10 years ago, you'd see 2 bottles. Now, you still see only 2 bottles in most bars, but now you'll have some bars that will have 10, 20, 30. So, and that's because the reduced tariffs or no tariffs have opened up the markets. And now with the tariffs coming back in, those markets are going to go away. And that's why it's so fucking frustrating.
Fred, what immediate impact, if you were to kind of try to quantify the impact of the tariffs as a worst case, what immediate impact do you think that could have? Look at the next, say, 2 years, 3 years, for example.
Well, you definitely saw the smaller brands that were, gambling on opening up markets in Europe. You saw a lot of that, and now that's taken away, and now they're being forced to market themselves here. And as you know, Americans have a very different taste of what whiskey is than the Europeans. So I would say like a small craft distiller could probably fool someone in Poland that their 3-year-old bourbon is actually good. Here, you're not going to be able to fool someone who's used to, Kentucky bourbon. So you basically change someone's business plan. The other one, I think Brown-Forman is in a super risk position. They've already came out, said they're losing like $128 million a year based on Jack Daniel's exports alone. So I think they are very vulnerable. And they could see some major reductions or some shifts in like how they do things. But Jack Daniel's is a very strong brand, and they should be fine. One positive note: Pernod coming into American whiskey much stronger. That's another European country. It's another European ally to negotiate on behalf of American whiskey.
And let me piggyback on that. I mean, when I'm by no means well traveled, but when I go there, there's the 2-3 brands that you always see. There's Bulleit in every bar. There's Maker's Mark, and there's Jack Daniel's. And beyond that, you've got to go to a specialty shop. There was one in Bath, Independent Spirits, that if anyone goes anywhere near there, you've got to go. But it's all these big brands. So the small brands can't meet the demand that they have here. So I think it is an issue for Brown-Forman with Jack Daniel's, and it is an issue for Diageo bringing Bulleit over to Europe. But they're all still making more bourbon than they've ever made. And Diageo's starting a whole nother damn new distillery. I don't know the answer to this, and that's why I was trying to defer to Nick. But seeing the big distilleries continue to churn out bourbon at a record pace tells me they have faith that this is just a blip and it'll get resolved, and they'll be able to open the European more. They'll get into India. They'll continue to push into Asia. And if they don't, we've got the same issue we had in the 60s, and we'll all be drinking 20-year-old bourbon on the cheap.
Well, there's a big thing that's different now. You have tourism. For years, bourbon's been up and down, up and down. It's basically just all based off of what you're drinking. Well, now you have tourism, the tourism component. So these brands are trying to create a lot of lifestyle. And from a liquid perspective, we're still not back to where we were in the 70s from a production standpoint. So a lot of the money that they are spending is actually not on the liquid. It is on the lifestyle and tourism element. And it's fun and sexy, but that's not getting bottles on the shelf.
That's a good way to close it out. As we started talking about, at the very beginning of this, we kind of talked about the growth, the height, and now we're talking about like we must save bourbon because we got to make sure that these tariffs don't really affect it. And I think it'd be pretty good to if we could get in the inside walls, if there's like a meeting amongst like the top 8 bourbon companies and they all try to predict and forecast and say like, well, why are you building a 50,000 barrel warehouse and we're not starting yet? Like, what do you see that we're not seeing? So it'd be cool to kind of understand exactly if we could get somebody in the show that is I guess say a bourbon economist that kind of can forecast out really what the next 10 years look like. We'll put that on the to-do list for us. So, with that, as we start kind of rounding this out, I want to say, gentlemen, thank you again for coming on the show. And thank you to everybody that was sitting here watching it live. I think we are concurrent watchers somewhere around like 75 at some point. So 63. So that was awesome. Thank you so much for everybody that was on here. So we at least had over 100 that joined us. But as we kind of start rounding this out, Nick, Brian, go ahead and kind of say your goodbyes, if you will.
Sure. Thanks, Kenny. Thanks, guys. Again, I'm Nick from Breaking Bourbon, breakingbourbon.com. Check us out on social media at Breaking Bourbon. And thanks, guys. This was fun. Always enjoy chatting on a Monday night and drinking bourbon. So
can't get much better.
Nope.
All right, Brian, you're up.
Yeah. Thanks for having me again. This is Brian with Sippin' Corn. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all Sippin' Corn, and online at bourbonjustice.com or sippincorn.com. And let's make sure we're thinking of Blake too. He dropped off pretty quick there, and think of everybody in Florida that's got this hurricane bearing down on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also going to be the last roundtable before we all see each other at Bourbon and Beyond. I know we're all really super psyched about it. We can't wait to meet a lot of you that are going to be there. So make sure that if you are there, don't feel scared or anything. Come up, say hi to us. We love talking to everybody. So Fred, I'll let you kind of go ahead and close it out for us.
Yeah. One quick thing. A correction to something I said. I had said that Pernod had Barton. It's not true. Constellation had Barton and they sold in 2009. Constellation also coming back into the bourbon business, but welcome. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us this evening. I love this show. The roundtables is my favorite thing that we do with Bourbon Pursuit. And if you're not following Bourbon Pursuit on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, you got to do it. It's just at Bourbon Pursuit. There you'll see basically Kenny's bar collection for like 24 days in a row, and then a random watch this tonight. It's the roundtable.
Yep. Absolutely. So make sure you, he gave us the shout out. Make sure you're following all these guys on social media. You can find their handles in our show notes as well. With that, cheers, fellas. Thanks again. And we'll see everybody at Bourbon and Beyond. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.